You took time off work. You slept more. You did the things people tell you to do when you are exhausted. You stepped back, you rested, you gave yourself space, and you came back still empty, not refreshed, not recharged, just as depleted as before, maybe more. And now there is a new layer on top of the exhaustion, the guilt of having rested and still not being okay. I want to talk about what's actually happening when rest doesn't work. Because this is one of the things I see most consistently in adults who come in thinking they just need a better work life balance and discover they have been running on borrowed energy for a very long time. Regular burnout, the kind most people mean when they use the word, happens when output exceeds input for long enough that the system depletes. You do too much, sleep little, don't recover adequately, and eventually you hit a wall. The fix is rest. Step back, reduce the demand, the system recovers. That model breaks down when the reason you burned out wasn't the volume of what you were doing, it was the overhead of doing it. And for adults with unidentified ADHD, that overhead is enormous. What I mean by overhead is this: when the executive system doesn't operate efficiently on its own, the brain compensates. It finds workarounds. It uses willpower where automation should be. It recruits extra attentional resources to do things that should happen without effort. It monitors, checks, rechecks, catches errors, plans redundantly, maintains masks, manages the gap between how things feel internally and how they need to look externally. All of that burns energy, a lot of it. And it's burning constantly in the background, whether or not you are aware of it. Regular rest doesn't restore a nervous system that is burning fuel around the clock on a problem that hasn't been identified or addressed. What the burnout looks like when it finally hits varies, but I want to describe the profile I see most often. It tends to be someone who has been high functioning, not someone who was obviously struggling, someone who had it together, who held the job, raised the family, maintained relationships, keep, kept the plates spinning. And then at some point, sometimes a specific trigger, sometimes just accumulated over years, the system stops. The executive function that was already working harder than it should have been simply doesn't come online anymore. Getting out of bed is hard. Decisions are hard. Tasks that used to take an hour now take a day. Everything feels flat. They can't find the energy to do things they used to enjoy. And here's the clinical puzzle. The, that profile looks like depression. It presents like depression. And sometimes it's depression. ADHD and depression coexist frequently. And chronic masking, burnout, is a real pathway into a depressive episode. But sometimes what is happening is not primarily depression. It's a nervous system that has reached its absolute limit on compensation and has done what any overtaxed system eventually does. It has gone into something resembling conservation mode, treating it like depression without addressing the underlying driver gets partial results at best. One of the things I hear consistently from people in this state is that they feel like a completely different person than they were 5 or 10 years ago. Like something broke and they can't find their way back to who they used to be. That is real. That is not catastrophizing. When you have been running an exhausting internal system for decades without knowing it, without support, without accommodation, the cumulative toll is real. The version of them that seemed fine was real too. It was just running on systems that have now given out. This is where the clinical picture gets important. As a nurse practitioner, I can sit with someone in this state and actually look at what is happening across the full differential: ADHD, depression, anxiety, burnout, hormonal factors, sleep quality, thyroid function. I can prescribe where appropriate, refer where needed, and build a management plan that accounts for what we're actually dealing with rather than just the surface presentation. Because the path forward for masking burnout looks different from the path forward for a primary depressive episode, even when the two can look identical in a waiting room. What I want you to hear is this. If you have been exhausted in a way that doesn't respond to rest, if you have been running hard for a long time and suddenly you can't anymore, that is not a character failure. That is a system that ran out of reserves. And the first step to getting those reserves back is understanding what was actually draining them. Unidentified ADHD in adults doesn't only mean missed deadlines and forgotten keys, it means years of neurological overhead of masking, of compensating in silence. And sometimes it means arriving at exactly this point, depleted in a way that doesn't make sense to anyone around you, including yourself. You deserve a real answer for that. If you are in Ottawa, Toronto, or anywhere in Ontario, and this is resonating, visit adultadhd.crocuscare.ca to learn about ADHD assessment at Crocus Care. This is educational content, not clinical advice for your specific situation. But if you have been running on empty and rest isn't refilling it, that is worth taking seriously. I will see you in the next one.